INCOSE UK Meet the Council session. Today we're going to be looking at the role of the Outreach Director, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined today by my friend, colleague, and the current INCOSE UK Outreach Director, Professor Stuart Jobbins. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, James. How are everybody?
Hope you're well. I guess the place we should start really is with a quick overview of what the role of Outreach Director involves.
Yeah, so that's not immediately obvious, is it? And let's start breaking it up a little bit. So first of all, as a council officer, you're like a director of a company. Part of your job on council is to hold the directors to account to make sure the organisation functions correctly, etc. So as the outreach director, you have a vote on council and you sit in on like council meetings. That's sort of standard for any of the officers. But outreach itself, outreach has many sort of facets, and I have during my tenure tried to make it point more towards the what shall I say, the development of young engineers or early career system engineers. The rationale behind that for me is that I've had a long career, and throughout my career, there's always been this claim that industry is short of engineers, and doubly so in terms of systems engineers. And in my role, as James will well know, as a consultant, I see an awful lot of companies and I see the same mistakes in system engineering being made over and over again with not sufficient system thinking. So the predecessor to me had a more professional engineering institute and national policy type bias to his role, but I like to think that I'm trying to take it the other way. So my major engagements tend to be with our industrial advisory board and our academics on the advisory board, and notably with the early careers forum, where the youngsters are coming in, or not necessarily youngsters, but people who have only started a systems engineer career recently and need to develop to be something valuable to their organizations. So those are the two sort of outreach facets. There are other bits of the role that outreach has gained over time. It's gained the responsibility for looking after groups. Those of you who are involved in volunteering with any part of INCOSE UK know there are various types of groups, whether they be local, i.e. regional geographic groups, or whether they be interest groups where people of like mind come together, or working groups that get together to essentially produce outputs, publications, etc. So there's a responsibility from the outreach director nowadays to make sure groups are formulated correctly, that they're proposed in front of council correctly, that they follow group policy, that they report their outcomes, and the outreach director is the point of contact for that. I think those are the major elements of the outreach director's role.
Cool. You said something really interesting there, which is that you've taken the role in a slightly different direction from your predecessor. Does that mean that the person holding the role has some freedom to do that?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, so the predecessor was very much. There is a lot of involvement with things like other professional engineering institutes. So I do get to sit on the National Engineering Policy Council, the Tomorrow's Engineers, there are a raft of things largely organised by the Royal Academy of Engineers, which are a coordination between multiple professional engineering institutes, whether they be mechanical engineers, the IET, chemical engineers, etc., who all get a voice in trying to set UK policy, I suppose. I think the reason they're important is because if I'm honest, I don't think our government ministers and certainly those who are the policymakers have a large engineering bias in their background. So there's a need for somebody to put an engineering spin on the outcomes of policy. So they're useful and important, but I tend to think that INCOSE UK is not a major voice in those things. It's a useful voice, but it's not a major voice. So I've taken it away from that role and gone towards the development of more system engineers as being the more significant output. Yeah, so I think you're right. You can put whatever spin on it that you like, I think, within the scope of the role, James. Yeah.
Excellent. So you did mention there, and of course, obviously, I know that you're a consultant, but I just wondered if you could spend a few moments telling us about your day job and possibly how that helps or hinders your volunteering within INCOSE.
Yeah. Okay. So from the helpful point of view, as a consultant, I am not wedded to one particular industry. In fact, my career, which you can probably tell by the hair, etc., has been somewhat long. Has taken me from defense, communications, medical, rail, automotive, aerospace, nuclear, industrial. So in my consulting role, I still have contact with an awful lot of companies that exist in those many spaces, and they all see themselves as differentiated. They all see themselves as unique. And yet, from a systems engineering point of view, what they're attempting to do is the systems thinking, is the set of processes that we normally associate with systems engineering. So I think it's useful to have that varied career in terms of being able to apply myself to any industry and understand or empathize with at least those different industries and their needs. So that's useful. The downside of being a consultant and being self-employed is that every day that I spend volunteering for INCOSE UK is a day that I potentially am not earning money. That, and of course, that we're all volunteers, so any costs involved in travel or time are our own. So you need to be quite well established to be able to give back in the role as an outreach director. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. And how would you quantify the amount of commitment that you're required to put into the role?
Okay, there's the formal what you must do, I suppose. So there are about 4 UK council meetings that I have to go to. Usually in person is better. I'm not a great fan of reading people's view and commitment remotely. I think it's much easier to do when you're actually in the room together. There are 2 joint meetings between the advisory board and council as well. So add that's 6 days to start with. There are days that the ECF meets, and I like to go along to some of those where I can. And then, of course, there's all the prep for all those meetings, which usually means, there are actions, outcomes of council meetings, or there's documents to prepare or generate. So probably, I don't know, 1 day every 2 weeks is an expectation of that sort of thing. But it could be as little as 1 a month, depending on your commitment to the role, I suppose.
Yeah, and I suspect you could go to the other extreme, couldn't you? That if you could find the time, you could do whatever you wanted. And
yeah, there's no doubt it could absorb as much of my time as I could give it.
yeah, cool. So thinking about the role in general, not necessarily from your perspective while you've been the incumbent, what do you think are the weaknesses and strengths of that particular role for INCOSE UK?
Yeah, okay, weaknesses. INCOSE UK today, and I'm hoping some of our move to IFSI will solve this, is not a well-recognised professional engineering institute in general. There are more engineering institutes with a larger population of people, whether it be IET or BCS or IMechE, etc. People recognise those names. They don't recognise INCOSE UK. And that sort of, I suppose, is a parallel to the people recognise system engineering as a profession. I don't think it's as well understood and or recognised as maybe a mechanical engineer or maybe an IT engineer nowadays, even with the BCS. Although in some of those, I question how much engineering really goes on. Yeah, so that's, I think, the weaknesses. The strengths, I think, if I look at INCOSE UK versus INCOSE, our sort of our parent, proportionately, I think UK fights above its weight it has a lot of expertise. And if you can find those pockets of expertise, they are often very well versed in what needs to be done. They're very well experienced. And I think that's significant. I see a lot of people who get stuck in one industry or one role and do one part very, very well, but system engineers need that breadth. They need the exposure to multiple industries and styles. They need the exposure to multiple processes and methods to be really useful and be able to challenge the ways of thinking. So I think, you know, being in the UK just happens to be really useful. Whether we're as joined up, I know there's a sort of intermediary part to INCOSE that's trying to come along, which is sort of Europe, Middle East and Africa, as an intersperse between INCOSE Central in the US and INCOSE UK. To date, that's more about trying to support other people starting INCOSE UK-like factions within INCOSE. So there's not really much to gain from that. And it could be a threat because it can consume time, because they want lots of mentoring, they want lots of experience, they want you know, just to know how you do it. So yeah.
Very cool. I was reminded when you said that systems engineering is not necessarily a very well recognized discipline, that frequently when I tell people I'm a systems engineer, I'm immediately asked what type of system. And they require an extra qualifier, don't they? It's not something that's understood as a discipline in its own right. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that system moniker gets stuck in everywhere, and people believe if I've got a system element in my job title, then I am a systems engineer. And I go into many, even quite large engineering companies, and they'll have hydraulic systems and pneumatic systems and electronic systems, etc., and not a single system engineer amongst them.
Cool. I know you did touch on a few aspects of this as you were giving your previous answer, but I wondered if you could perhaps think about some of the opportunities that INCOSE UK, and particularly the outreach director, has got.
Yeah, well, again, I'm probably going to hark back to my sort of personal view here. That the opportunities from my point of view is, if system engineers aren't well recognised, then there's an opportunity to do something about that. And I think UK is well placed to try and do that. If I talk about the lack of system engineers, I think then again the UK outreach director is well placed to try and both, I suppose, develop the early careers engineers, but also to help encourage other youngsters who might be considering a career in engineering towards system engineering rather than a specific discipline of engineering. In my career, I've probably come from more software centric, because I was in control systems based systems always. So all of the mechanical systems all had a control element that had a computer in the middle. So I've always ended up with these, what I call software intensive systems, not because they contain a lot of software, but because software was the brain that made the system work. And I think that I see as being still a huge part of the future. I don't see purely mechanical systems or purely electrical systems being sufficiently efficient for our future world, or sufficiently able to integrate with other systems in an easy way. So for me, there's a natural tendency, I think, to become multidiscipline, but also have a necessary understanding of the electronics and software side of the world as an eminent part of those systems.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that I was instantly reminded then of the work that our colleagues at Scarecrow have done with Croft and Beam Engine, because that was essentially a mechanical system when it was created, and it's become a software intensive system because of the monitoring that's been installed.
Absolutely. Even if it's just an instrumenting something mechanical to allow that integration. Yeah, it's a classic.
Cool. Has there something that's been a particular challenge that's stuck in your mind in your role? Is there?
Yeah. It's a challenge that I don't think I've solved either. One of the problems with trying to coordinate volunteer groups is you have no levers. They're volunteers. They will do work as and when it pleases them, and when it fits in with their lifestyle and their work. You know, at the end of the day, they have to earn a crust, which is problematic if you're trying to be authoritative in terms of making them do things, making them comply with the group policy, making them produce a report, making sure that their behavior and standards are correct. All of these things are still necessary. And that's not just from the council's point of view, but for every member that volunteers to act on behalf of INCOSE UK. And there is a big tension, I suppose, between the ethical and moral behavior of volunteers and their wish to give back versus their ability to give back. So those are quite challenging.
So you say there that you perhaps haven't quite resolved that yet. It may be a wicked problem. It may be one that we never resolve. But
Absolutely.
is there something that you can point to that you're quite proud of, that you think you've made a great contribution
Um, I wish I could say yes. I think the answer is probably no. There's not one particular element of my tenure in as outreach director that I'm particularly proud of. I'd like to believe that I've had an impact with the Early Careers Forum in helping them recognize things that they didn't necessarily take for granted. The thing I've noticed with, especially with the Early Careers Forum, is that you demonstrate a particular ability in a particular domain discipline, and the early careers won't recognize that in abstract that same approach can be taken elsewhere. And I watched that recently at a lovely demonstration in the rail facility in Birmingham University, which demonstrated a digital model, as it were, of rail control and the impact of a broken train or a broken signal, etc., and the build-up and therefore and then release of traffic. And when the assembled masses came back together, there wasn't very many of them from the rail industry, and I said, the chair asked what they would be taking away from that, and practically all of them said, well, probably nothing, because it's very rail oriented. And I sat there sort of a little stupefied, and then stood up and said, how many of you are working with digital simulation? How many of you are working on digital twins? How many of you use simulation as a mechanism to validate what you do in your system engineering? And without, everybody put up their hand. I said, well, did you not recognize that that's actually what's just been demonstrated for you? So don't take away the specifics, take away the abstract. Here's an approach that's actually useful.
Cool. I think actually you're probably being slightly modest in saying that there's been no great achievements. I also think that probably one of the challenges of being outreach director is your biggest impact is outside of INCOSE UK. And the fact that people know that INCOSE UK exists and see its presence is probably one of your greatest achievements.
Yes, but I think that's a bit like brand engineering. Sometimes that's it almost feels passive. You have to be there and be seen. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily engender an immediate response. So.
Absolutely. Clearly, there have been some changes in the role since you've been incumbent. But sorry, I should have asked right at the top. How long have you been outreach director?
I'm coming up to the end of my 3rd year, and 3 years is the traditional tenure. Ordinarily, I would be standing again to have another go, but unfortunately, I have some health issues that have come on me recently, which mean it's probably not practical for me to put in as much voluntary effort. I must, push my time towards earning some money while I still can, and maybe take a little bit of the personal workload off. So
yeah, sure. But what have the changes been since you?
Oh, I think the biggest change is down to the past president and the current president, which is really the move to IFSI. And I know from an outsider's point of view, that's moved at apparent glacial pace, but the reality is there are lots of steps and lots of other actors who control the pace of that, and it's not been in our doing. But for me, IFSI rebranding gives us a real opportunity to shake out some of the problems. Simple things, some stuff. The INCOSE UK website to me is outdated and old and not really fit for purpose. It needs repurposing, but it needs money spent on it, and we don't have a great deal of money ultimately. But the messaging is the other thing I'd like to change. We have, I suppose, on the INCOSE UK website, spent a lot of time and effort sending messages to those who are members of INCOSE UK, when to me there needs to be a dual messaging system. There needs to be a message that's communicable to those who are outside system engineering to understand what system engineering is and why joining INCOSE UK might be a good thing, or even appreciating what system engineering does. To my mind, we could do a better job of simpler language to the outside world, recognizing that system engineering has such a huge scope. Just explaining that to people would be a good idea. And then there's the more those in the know inside system engineering who maybe live with, I don't know, I see ISO 15288 as a daily part challenge, then accepting that they understand those things and not having to spell those things out. There's a different set of messaging, I think, for professional engineers. So I'd like to think that we can use that to make those changes for the future.
Okay, cool, good. So thinking about, as you mentioned there, that you won't be standing in the forthcoming election, what are the skills that you think candidates need in order to do the role successfully?
Well,
Cats, obviously.
Yeah. Well, from a council point of view, for a starter, there is a great opportunity to work up those skills that you might need as a future non-executive director, or to work on standards bodies or whatever, wherever there are huge amounts of collaboration required, where you have to set aside personal agendas or even corporate agendas and live for the betterment of your profession. And that can be quite challenging. And it's something that you only learn by being exposed in those sort of environments. So that's definitely a skill. I'm lucky enough to have been on standards bodies and on collaborative ventures throughout my career. So to me, that was a relatively easy fit. Understanding professional engineering institutes, I think, is another one. Why would people want to be professionally registered? Why do they want to be recognized? What benefit do they gain from that? Understanding what it takes to become professionally registered and people's interest in doing that, I think, is also significant. So that there is a value, but it's not easy to expound the value of belonging to a professional engineering society. I mean, it's nice to have the post nominals in your name set, etc., and on your business cards or virtual business cards, but I personally get something more from the profession than you just get from access to a library or just having those letters after your name. It's access to the people, being able to join into that network and try and go to people who will give you some insight into a part of the world that maybe you need to understand but don't yet understand well enough. So for me, that's those, being able to play both sides of that, to use your experience and skills to help others on one side of the network, and to be able to stand up and speak and not be frightened, to question and not be worried that it's a dumb question. Those are skills which you need as a professional engineer, and as a consultant, even more so, you spend a lot of time questioning why things are done the way they're done. And I think that's true of INCOSE UK. As a system engineer, that's a skill that's useful both for the formation, for the policy within INCOSE UK, or just the future of what we're trying to do. It's also useful to have a bit of a business head, because bottom line is we need money to actually exist, and membership fees pay a little amount. They're almost the seed money that enable us to run the bigger, more revenue generating things like the ASEC conferences. And there is no, spare money. Every money has to have a business case behind it. What is it going to bring as a result of doing this, of making this investment? So it helps to understand the business role of life, I think, as a council member anyway. And that's certainly true of INCOSE. We're lucky that a lot of our UCAB are happy to invest in their early careers people, whether that be time or whether that be premises to hold a meeting or whatever. But we should see that as a big plus, because that's a value that's not cash value, but it's highly valuable in terms of creating better system engineers. Yeah.
I mean, I guess one question really is that has your time as outreach director been fulfilling? Have you enjoyed it?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the INCOSE Council are always an eclectic bunch by definition. We come from all walks of life. I'd like to see better cross representation, more early careers elements. Maybe a better balance of the sexes and those sort of things. I think we are getting there. I think there is a recognition that we need to address diversity and inclusion in a more in a better fashion, as it were, with more emphasis, to make sure that that's the case. Otherwise, I'm afraid that there's a bit of a history that the male stale stuff has dominated for well, certainly 20 or 30 years of my career. It's not going to change quickly, because we don't have enough of a population to pull on to make that change happen instantly. But we should be well aware that we need to make those changes. We need to get those views. Yeah. Diversity for me always breeds better innovation, always breeds better understanding. So I'm all for it.
People might be slightly surprised to discover that although, as you say, many of the positions have been filled by white middle-aged men, that generally when their position comes available, there aren't many candidates that come forward.
No, and that is problematic. I think it's nice to volunteer and get the kudos from volunteering in an organisation, and I get a sort of warm glow inside when I do something, and I do quite a lot of volunteering for other professional engineering institutes as well. But I'm in a career position when I am able to do that, and I think in early career there's a feeling that you don't have the skills necessary to do that, and in mid-career often maybe a concentration on family or income or career. They're very huge pressures which don't really leave a lot of time for voluntary activities. Yeah. So it's a shame, but I understand where it comes from. But it does mean that whenever we ask for volunteers, there are not many that step forward, I'm afraid. And if it's for roles that require quite a substantial commitment, an ongoing commitment, it's not something you can dip in and dip out of. Once you've committed, you're going to have to do something. That can be difficult on a personal level. It can be difficult if you're employed for the corporation that employs you, to make that level of commitment, especially in small companies. Larger companies, possibly it's easier to sell. although it depends. Yeah, it is a shame. I'm not sure there's any easy way out of it.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same. I mean, I guess um, without wanting to be defeatist about it, there's nothing we can do about people's personal circumstances. That's
No.
a problem we can intervene in. But I guess there is the opportunity to certainly help with the skills aspect. Perhaps we could have we could endorse some form of leadership training to prepare people for roles. I mean, perhaps in terms of organizational support, we could encourage the UCAB companies to perhaps support there. But you're absolutely right. It does seem to be one of those problems that we have very little control over.
Yeah, it's a shame it's not wrapped into professional registration type credit, as it were. Being a volunteer with active participation rather than the volunteer who's just signed up on the list and listening in but not doing anything. I think should get some form of credit towards professional registration. It's almost a rite of passage for me as a professional engineer.
Yeah, cool. So you've talked about, I mean, this perhaps leads in quite nicely, actually. I was going to ask you about not only what have you got out of the role, but what a future holder could get out of the role. And I guess that is one of the answers, isn't it? That if you're working towards professional registration, then certainly you can develop competencies in the role which will work towards that.
Most definitely, that's very clearly the case. And I also think it also leads to opportunities. I mean, maybe people don't understand non-executive directorships, but there are a lot of companies out there that are looking for diversity on their boards or their advisory boards or whatever, in terms of people who can come with a particular, I hate the word you use, spin, but certainly a particular engineering bent to a number of companies. And so I think roles like this do set you up with the right skill set to be considered for non-executive director type roles.
If people are interested in potentially standing for the role of outreach director, where can they find more information?
On the INCOSE UK website, or they can email the secretariat at INCOSE UK. I think it's also going to be in the next version of ePreview magazine, or maybe somebody will to confirm that for me. But I think the call for nominations will go out in ePreview anyway. And basically, if all else fails, contact me. I'm quite happy to direct people, or any council member, quite honestly. And there is a nominations process to go through, and it's not arduous. It will require people to write a little bit about themselves and their CV, if it was the same for me, and then they will go through to a committee to compete for the position, assuming there is sufficient people come forward for the role. So yeah.
Excellent. And then I guess just to wrap things up, are you optimistic about the future, particularly with the move to IFSI?
Very much, yeah. I'd love to think that IFSI is one of those inflection points for INCOSE UK. I felt we've sort of got a bit stuck with our branding and what we do, and I think IFSI gives us an opportunity to shake off some of that and really try and put system engineering on the map as a professional engineering sort of skill set, and I still feel, I also belong to the IET. I'm a fellow of the IET, and in 20 years ago, it used to be quite worrying that as a professional registration advisor, systems engineering was seen as a non-career. So much so that trying to become a register as a professional engineer with a systems engineering sort of history and experience was a really tough gig to get through on the IET. I think INCOSE UK, and hopefully IFSI in the future, is making a big impact in terms of recognizing system engineers and getting them professionally registered. In fact, I would still believe that the journey to professional registration as a system engineer is going to be a far, I won't say easier, but easier to convince the assessors, etc., that you have the appropriate wherewithal to get past the UK spec exam questions. So yeah, I think they're doing a grand job of that, and I'm hoping that IFSI will spur us on to being a bigger chapter, quite honestly, with a bigger membership, and enable us to do things that that we couldn't otherwise do. Being too small means that financially we're only sort of on the cusp of viable a lot of the time, when we could do something if we were a little more cash rich.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Always the answer, isn't it? If we only had more money. That's what we need. Well, thank you very much, Stuart. That's been really informative, and thank you for speaking with us today.
You're most welcome.